going to prep the cover of my journal with a little bit of gesso, and you can see I'm having trouble getting it out of the bottle, so just take the lid off, tap a little bit out. Prepping the cover with gesso, though it's not vital, does help for the colors to show up brighter, and also just it's like priming your walls, and so gesso is one of those things that I usually do. To start things out, I'm using my Catalyst wedge, applying just not super smooth, not worrying about it being covering every square inch or every patch, but getting a nice layer down. And I don't have to wait much for it to dry before I start adding in my paper bits, but you can let it dry. Sometimes I even scribe into the wet gesso and add texture. I didn't this time, but laying out some little bits of papers. These are just scraps that are laying around on my desk from other projects, security envelopes, cut off pieces of other, like I said, other projects, so little scraps of paper that I have a hard time throwing away because they fit into projects exactly like this. So another bottle that's plugged. I'm going to go ahead and take the top off of that. I'm using matte medium now. This is a fluid matte medium. You can use a heavier weight matte medium. Matte medium is like the sticky part of paint without the pigment, and so it's going to act as my glue. And so I'm applying a little bit to the back side of the paper, a little bit to the surface of my journal page. And I'm just giving up and taking the top off of this one as well. Applying a little bit to the surface of the page, back side of the paper, and then joining the two together. And when you scrape over top, what you're doing is removing the excess from behind and getting a nice thin coverage. So see all that excess matte medium? I continue to use that until it's gone, and then add a little bit more as needed. But by scraping over the top, I'm getting all the excess out from behind, and it's making nice smooth contact with the paper and the surface. I'm not thinking too much about where I'm placing things, except when I come in with this large, bold pattern, I'm trying not to have them right next to each other. I'm also alternating the direction of the stripes. And so your eye is going to naturally zoom into what is different. Our eyes like to see differences, and so when something is so boldly different than all the rest, it really attracts your eye. So you want to make sure, you'll notice in a moment I add a little more of that stripe in the upper left-hand side, just to allow your eye to travel around rather than ping-ponging back and forth between those two spots. I'm giving you a third spot. with the stripes. So I finished the collage part of this, adding all of the bits of paper, and now I'm going to come in with just a little touch of paint in certain areas. There's certain areas that don't have as much pattern. You notice that's where I'm going first. Tiniest little touch of paint, using my catalyst wedge to spread it out. Again, I'm not trying to cover everything up, but I'm just adding some pops of color here to make the background a little bit more cohesive. Paper was coming up a little bit there. You can just lift it up, and the color underneath acts as an adhesive as well, because remember, this paint is sticky. Coming in with a second color, my favorite, olive green, mixing with that turquoise blue. And I'm going to repeat the process. Stenciling, and these polka dot stencils, just adding a really bold pattern to this is really fun. I love polka dots, and I can tend to overuse them, but these stencils are new and I wanted to use them in lots of different sizes. This repetition of shape is also a great composition tool. Our eye likes to see differences, but it also recognizes patterns, and when we repeat these circles in different sizes, it gives the piece a bit of cohesiveness as well. I'm tapping my paint through the stencil with a makeup sponge. I'm removing most of the paint, but tapping through a makeup sponge gives me just the right amount. And I'm coming back in and adding a little bit of white, and there are some areas where the paint is still wet and it will blend with the white. So I'm using my finger this time so I can really get in and add this touch of white exactly where I want it to go. And you can see when I hit that blue, it's still wet. When I hit the green, it's still wet. It's giving me a tint of those colors. That's kind of nice as well. the water-soluble pencil and just scribbling and scribing, making marks, random marks into the wet paint. It's kind of nice when that water-soluble pencil, this is a Caran d'Ache Techno RGB pencil. When it hits the wet paint, it activates a little bit so it gets nice and dark. But I'm making some scribbly scribes into the wet paint, into the patches of solid color, just to add my hand into the piece. And I'm getting it dry. As I'm drying, you'll notice I'm wondering, how am I going to get a word on here and have it stand out? I just auditioned a little card on there. Looks like it's going to cover up too much. So I think I scrap that idea and decide that eventually I'm going to, once it gets dry, I'm going to rubber stamp onto some deli paper. This is just a little scrap of deli paper. I am going to pull up my rubber stamps and my StazOn ink. StazOn is a nice solvent-based ink that doesn't run or smear or bleed when you apply water or paint or acrylic mediums. So I'm stamping out, this is going to be my ideas journal, just a place to capture ideas. I know you're probably like me and you have dozens and dozens and dozens of ideas, but if I have a nice place to put them, then it's always a fun way to implement the ideas by just flipping through my ideas journal. So I've stamped the word ideas on some deli paper. I'm going to go ahead and apply a little bit of white acrylic paint behind, just because the deli paper turns transparent when I apply it. So I want to make sure that it stands out. A little bit of white paint, applying with my fingers, and because paint is sticky, it's going to go ahead and stick that deli paper down, but I am adding a little bit of matte medium just to secure the edges, lifting up the edges and getting that matte medium behind and scraping over the top, making sure that everything is just all applied down. That matte medium dries nice and clear. And there you have it. That's a nice hand painted and collaged covered ideas journal.